Hello, this is Dr. Trevathan, and welcome back to the Epilepsy Education for Community Health Workers program. Today we're going to be talking about electrical activity, brain functioning, and seizures. Now this is a complicated, large topic, but we're going to talk about some highlights, some points that will help you as we discuss other topics. Now the cells within the nervous system are called neurons. These neurons communicate with each other through electrical impulses and chemical signals that generate these electrical impulses. The neuron is the basic working unit of the brain, and the neuronal cells tend to be specialized cells that are designed to transmit information between other nerve cells, and then also to muscles, glands, and other tissues that receive signals from the brain and also that actually send sensory information from the outside world to the brain. Now each human neuron, as shown in the cartoon below and to your left, consists of a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The cell body is that yellow structure you see on the right, and then the dendrites that come off of the cell body play a key role and are very important, especially in epilepsy, so we'll spend a little more time on that, but the dendrites are involved in the communication between other neuronal cells. Coming off of the cell body is an axon. An axon is basically like a microscopic electrical cable that, just like many electrical cables that we think of use in our world today, is covered in an insulation that helps the transmission of the electrical signals move faster and more reliably. And that insulation-like covering is referred to as a myelin sheath. At the end of axons, which sometimes can be very long, are the axon terminals. That actually terminate, or in some situations actually insert into another organ, such as a muscle. The dendrites extend from this neuronal cell body, and they receive messages from other neurons, and these dendrites are then covered with what we call synapses. Now the synapses are tiny, and you can't really see it on this particular diagram, but if you take a look at the cartoon now on the right, you'll see a dendrite that is then magnified and shows what are called synaptic clefts. And each dendrite has multiple synaptic clefts. And so if you think about a brain in which there are billions or perhaps even 100 billion neuronal cells, and that each neuronal cell has multiple dendrites, and that then each dendrite has multiple different synaptic clefts, it gives you an idea of just how complicated and well-designed the communication systems are within the brain. These synaptic clefts are actually where the transmission of information occurs between neuronal cells. And this transmission of information occurs by chemicals moving across the synaptic cleft, and this is shown on the left, chemicals that move from the dendrite and then are released to go across the synaptic cleft and then land on the other side. And when they land on the other side, they're really connecting with an axon or another dendrite that connects to another neuronal cell. And these chemical transmissions, called with chemicals referred to as neurotransmitters, move from one synapse, from a synapse from a dendrite over to another neuronal cell, and do so through chemical messengers that then generate electricity. Now, this electrical activity in the brain that occurs between different neurons is really much of the basis of the brain activity electrically. And this artist rendition of this activity is shown on the left, in which you can see multiple neurons, each with multiple dendrites and they're all communicating with each other. Now, it's this communication or electrical activity between neurons that sometimes can go awry, and the signals can become abnormal or sometimes occur almost as a storm. And that actually can produce seizures and is really a critically important issue for us as we work to learn more about epilepsy and take care of children with epilepsy. Let's take a look at a diagram that you became familiar with some previous lectures. And let's remember the motor strip that is at the back part of the frontal lobe, directly in front of the central sulcus. And that motor strip is actually involved in controlling movements of the opposite side of the body. This is represented by the cartoon there on the left part of that cartoon on the right, where you see the area of the cortex that's very large that controls the tongue and the face, the mouth, and the hand, because those structures are so complex. And then a smaller area of cortex that controls the leg and the trunk that actually have fewer muscles and are less complicated. Then directly behind the central sulcus, in the anterior part of the parietal lobe, is the sensory area, organized almost exactly like the motor strip that's directly in front of it. And this sensory area is also laid out in such a way that most of the cortical surface is devoted to actually receiving sensory input from the tongue and the mouth, the face, and the hand. Now, I bring this up because this is a great example of how we can localize where electrical activity is in the brain. You'll notice on the cartoon there on the bottom right, that is actually a head or a brain with the eyes at the top and the back of the head at the back. And you'll see that there are electrodes that are represented by the dots with letters and numbers next to them. Those represent electrodes that are placed on the skin surface, but are done so in a very systematic way using bony landmarks so that we can actually tell from electrodes on the skin where the electrical activity is coming from in the brain tissue that's directly beneath. The cartoon now on your left shows that there's a very complicated but very systematic electrode placement system that's put on the skin surface by trained EEG technologists to measure electrical activity in the brain. These electrodes are placed using bony landmarks such as the preauricular point that's in the front of the ear, the mastoid process that's in the back of the ear, and also bony landmarks in the front and the back of the head. By using these bony landmarks as a reference point, one can measure the distance between these bony landmarks and do some math that helps the placement of these electrodes. And the electrode placement system then reliably in all people can really record activity from the brain below, and you can actually tell what part of the brain you're recording from. Now this is important because when we are taking care of children with seizures, then we would like to know where those seizures come from and what type of seizures they have. And the EEG can sometimes be very helpful as a tool in helping us understand that. Now, if we think back about how always in the brain, including while we're here having this conversation and listening to this lecture, there's electrical activity that's occurring between all of our neurons and baseline brain activity that's going on all the time. And that type of brain activity has a certain pattern that shows up on an EEG tracing that is shown on the right, which is a normal EEG, in this case, during drowsiness or light sleep. Now, when there's a seizure, while the EEG is being recorded, or the electroencephalogram is being recorded, then an electrical storm essentially inside the brain that is manifested by a seizure can be recorded. Like that, for example. So even without specialized EEG training, you can see right away that the waveforms on the right are vastly different from those on the left. And on the right, those are brain waves recorded while a child is having an absence seizure, in which the electrical activity in the brain is quite abnormal. So the electrical activity in the brain that occurs all the time is normal, is really a function of chemical and electrical transmission between neurons, and that electrical activity can be measured by an EEG, and that EEG measurement of brain electrical activity sometimes can be very helpful in us understanding more about seizures in children and in our patients. So I hope this has been helpful, and now it's time for you to practice what you've learned with a group activity.